100 yards, slight right onto causeway, A312. Take the next right onto causeway, A312. Continue on A312 for 1 mile. In a quarter of a mile, at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit onto the Parkway, A312. Exit the roundabout onto the parkway. Continue on the parkway for 1 mile.
They'll send the money to your bank. Easy as pie. To find out how much your car's worth.
In a quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the second exit onto the M4 slip road to Heathrow Airport, M25. Exit the roundabout onto the slip road. In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4. Continue on M4 for 3 miles.
feel like they are our neighbors and stuff. But I don't think any country should get involved with Russia because this might end up being really badly for anyone who get involved.
I mean, do you think? I mean, many of the refugees who flee Ukraine will go to Poland. Either some will go to Hungary, perhaps others to Moldova.
Yes, they will spread, but what I'm trying to say, there's already a lot of them by now, before even the situation unfolded. So they're saying they are welcome, but I'm not really sure if my country is really ready for that.
Right. What do you think? Because you think they don't have the resources for it.
They might not, I don't know, I live in London and I just thought, like, no one will get involved in this situation and they have to resolve it somehow. And in my opinion, they just should surrender and people should be able to return to their homes.
Who should surrender? The Ukrainians?
Ukraine, yeah.
Well, just give in to Putin.
Well, in my opinion, it will cost a lot of more lives if people will be fighting.
But they've had 30 years of freedom, Ida, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It would mean going back to repression, to totalitarianism, no democracy, a controlled media, a puppet Russian regime would be the government.
You see, this is what I didn't know because I'm not really into politics and it sounds really bad what you're saying, but I just think Russia is a very strong country and...
Well, I hear what you say, and there'll be many people I think will be thinking perhaps the same, surrender to avoid the bloodshed, because potentially tens of thousands, if not more, could die. Ida, thank you very much, and I hope your mum's okay in Poland. Let's go to Chris, who's calling from Barry in South Wales. Chris, hello.
Hello, mate. How's it going?
I'm all right, thank you. What do you think about this?
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
Truck driver, and over the last week I've sort of been in Germany and France, and over the last couple of days there's been a lot of big military convoys, especially France heading east. But to be honest with you, I just think everything that's going on at the moment, I think...
Keep right to stay on M4.
Recent history and maybe learn from the mistakes that we made, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. You know, I think
Continue on M4 for 2 miles.
history to learn the lessons to move forward.
All right, Chris, that's an interesting point. Chris calling from Barry, South Wales. Well, and I think the point he's making is we do not want to get involved, sucked into a military conflict. Look what happened in Iraq, look what happened in Afghanistan. We left Afghanistan and within days the Taliban were in control. Now, it's being described as the biggest ever package of economic sanctions against Russia, which Britain has enforced. Some are still calling for more action. A little earlier I spoke with Steve Reed. He's the Shadow Justice Secretary and the Labour MP for Croydon North. Mr. Reid, there was criticism of the first wave of sanctions. They were substantially upgraded yesterday by the Prime Minister. Are we nearly there, or should there be even more done?
The first wave was inadequate, that's absolutely clear. And in fact, going back over the decades now, after the invasions of Georgia and the Crimea, the sanctions, the pain inflicted on the Russian government and economy was inadequate, and that's why they've done this again. So this time, the pain of sanctions must outweigh whatever benefits Putin and his gangsters perceive that they might get from invading Ukraine. Now that is for Britain to play our role in it. We'll see on Monday morning what the government brings forward, but the Labour Party will be pushing the government for these to be as tough as they possibly can. But it's also something we must do together with our partners around the world, particularly here in Europe, to really make Putin and the oligarchs who sustain him in power feel the financial consequence to themselves of the decision they've taken to invade an independent and free country.
There's some distress, there's distress the wrong word, there's some frustration, isn't there, that the British government is calling for Russia to be ejected from the SWIFT international payment system to try to hit their economy even harder, but it's the European Union which is thus far resisting this.
It is some countries inside the European Union, of course. It's not the whole of the European Union. So I don't know whether you saw the tweet that came out from Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Union, criticising Germany and Italy for holding back on excluding Russia from the global banking.
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
Called SWIFT. Their concern is that because they are so dependent on Russian gas, that if Russia turns off the taps entirely, then that will be devastating to their economy. So we can't leave individual countries to face the consequences of these decisions alone. It And where
Keep right to stay on M4.
it will be harder hit by the consequences of these decisions taken against Russia. We will need to support them as well. So I think that's where international collaboration becomes even more important. But very, very key point this, we cannot let Russia off the hook again like after the invasion of Crimea, because they did this to Ukraine because they got away with Crimea. If they get away with Ukraine, who is next?
Indeed, I mean, there's a number of small states nearby that could be invaded. We assume that they won't go for Poland or any countries that are part of NATO. On a wider point, Steve Reed, do you think the West is doing enough? I mean, the Prime Minister's used the expression, nothing is off the table, but of course one thing is off the table. Nobody, not the United States, no European Union countries or Britain, are saying they will put any troops on the ground.
Well, we can't. I mean, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. NATO is an alliance whose members have come together as independent countries and agree that an attack on one is an attack on all. Ukraine is not part of that alliance, but should one boot step over the border into one of those NATO member states, then the whole of NATO is drawn into this conflict. Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, has made clear we cannot send troops in for that reason, but there's plenty of support that we can give to the Ukrainians, anti-weapon systems, body armour, financial support, all of that we should be looking to help them with.
And what of your colleague we're going to be speaking to in the programme, Alf Dubs, Lord Dubs? He, as you know, fled Nazi tyranny in Eastern Europe in 1938, 1939. He's saying, if necessary, Britain must take its share of refugees who may flee Ukraine.
In principle, he's right, and if that is what those Ukrainians want, I mean, it may be the case that Ukrainians who are crossing the border today, we've seen it on our screens, haven't we, would prefer to stay closer to home, and in that case we should make a financial contribution to making sure that is possible. I'm not aware that an awful lot of Ukrainians have asked to come to the UK. Perhaps people who have families here would want to until the situation is resolved back home, but we have to play our part. We have a moral obligation to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll want to come here.
Can I just ask you, some of your colleagues, there's reports that the Labour leader Keir Starmer is going to ask them to desist from this motion, effectively blaming NATO for...
In 2 miles, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central.
And Diane Abbott, who were in the shadow cabinet, should they repudiate what they said earlier or lose the whip? Because that's some suggestion that that's where Keir Starmer's moving towards.
There was a very small number of MPs who signed a letter that appeared to blame the West and NATO and Britain for Vladimir Putin's aggression. That was naive of them in the extreme, naive and wrong. They've all, as I understand it now, withdrawn their names, having been spoken to by the whips. But Keir Starmer has made absolutely clear that the Labour Party stands foursquare alongside the government on this in opposing Putin's aggression. And to deter Putin from doing this again, it's not just political parties in Britain that need to stand together, it is the whole of the free world that will stand together, and that is what we're intent on doing.
Steve Reed, Shadow Justice Secretary, going late now to the headlines with Amelia Cox.
The Prime Minister has announced personal sanctions will be placed on Russia's President Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Following an emergency summit, NATO has announced it's deploying more troops to Eastern Europe as Russian forces approach Kiev. British intelligence suggests the bulk of troops are still around 30 miles away from the centre of Ukraine's capital. LBC weather, spells of rain continuing across the north tonight, mainly clear in the south, a low of -1.
LBC Travel, I'm Anne-Marie Walsh. Is queuing on the M25 anti-clockwise towards junction 27 for the M11 after breakdown earlier on. There are delays on the M40 southbound from junction 5 at Stokenchurch to 4 at High Wycombe because of a breakdown, and the North Circular remains closed southbound between Staples Corner and the Neeson Interchange for an ongoing police investigation. It's very busy around East Finchley and Henley's Corner, with further delays through Cricklewood and Willesden as traffic diverts away. In Westminster, Whitehall is blocked because of a demonstration near to Downing Street. Parliament Street remains closed between Parliament Square and Whitehall as a mobile crane is in use. And the A21 is closed both ways between Catford and Bromley for a police investigation.
This is LB3.
In a quarter of a mile, at junction 6, take the A355 exit to Slough Central. Exit at junction 6. In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the third exit onto Tons Lane, A355. Exit the roundabout onto Tons Lane. In a quarter of a mile, slight left towards Sippenham Lane. Slight left towards Sippenham Lane. Continue for 1.5 miles.